Welcome to another episode of the Oz Comics Show. I should probably note this is a little special. This is being pre-recorded, so if you're trying to leave comments, we won't be able to see them from the future or the past, whichever way you want to look at it, from whoever's perspective. So what I'll mention is that we are talking to Matt Schofield today about his awesome comic, Steamroller Man. And I should note, it's Wednesday when we broadcast this, so this Friday there will be drink and draw. I'm not sure what the topic is because it's a little ahead of time. And watch our other shows like Chinwag and what we read this week. Comics recent reads. I should probably call it by the proper name. And I hope that sometime very close to this we'll be releasing the new season of Let's Make a Comic Book. So yes, that'll be interesting.
Very exciting.
Enough of us. Let's tune in to Mr. Schofield.
Let's do it. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to the show, Matt. Thank you so much for being with us and taking the time to do this pre-recording. Hello to everyone in the future.
Hello,
Matt,
everyone in the future.
I know that we've brought you all the way across from LA tonight.
Yeah. Yes.
Can you give us a little bit of an introduction about you?
Yeah. My name's Matt Schofield, and I grew up in Brisbane. I moved to LA in 1996 to work in the animation industry, and I've been here ever since. I've worked on a few feature films, worked on Cats Don't Dance and Iron Giant and Prince of Egypt. And after that experience, I decided I wanted to try something different. And so I got into TV animation on The Simpsons. And I started as a character layout artist on The Simpsons in 1999. And I've worked on the show ever since. And I've done almost every job on the show in terms of I've done character layout, I've done character design, storyboard revisions, animation timing. I've been an assistant director and an episode director, and I'm currently the supervising storyboard director on the show, which I've had that job for 10 years now. So that's why I'm talking to you from Los Angeles.
Yes, amazing. You've got such an extensive background. I can't wait to get to know a little bit more about your history. But first and foremost, obviously, we are talking everything about Steamroller Man, as you can see. Can you give us a little bit of information, a little bit about what it's about?
Yeah, Steamroller Man is a superhero comedy comic that has its tongue firmly in its cheek. It's very influenced by things like The Tick and the 1960s Batman TV show in the respect that it can be read as a action-packed superhero story, but there's also jokes, and the jokes can a kid can read it and just have a great time reading it and still get some of the jokes, and then there's jokes that people who have been reading comics for years and years, like I have, will get the references and things that I'm throwing in there.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's the kind of people say, like, you should make the comic that make the kind of comic that you want to read, and so this is totally me doing that. It was kind of my reaction to how serious and grim comics, mainstream superhero comics have sort of gotten in the years since I was a kid. So I just wanted to make something fun. It was initially something that I could show my kids when they were younger and amuse them. And Steamroller Man was created after I had a conversation with my kids around the dinner table about we were making up cool superhero names, and my youngest son said, "What about Steamroller Man?" And I had like the light bulb moment above my head, and I immediately had a picture in my mind of what Steamroller Man looks like with the giant roller for a head. And I sketched it on a napkin, and I said, "Yeah, that's awesome. How about like he'd look like this, right?" And I showed my son, and he said, "No, I meant with steamrollers for hands." And I was like, "Oh, okay, well then that can be your version of Steamroller Man. This is my version of Steamroller Man." And so from that point, I couldn't really I was just started thinking about like, oh, well, what would the implications be of a superhero that had a giant head? Like the first thing I thought of was, well, he couldn't really easily have a secret identity because how do you cover up that huge head? And so then one idea kind of rolled into, sorry, that was a total unintentional pun. One idea flowed into the next, where I thought, oh, well, it'd be funny if he tried to put glasses on the way Clark Kent does to disguise his huge head. He just uses glasses, and nobody recognizes him, or he thinks nobody recognizes him. And when I started drawing that, I realized, well, I can't put like a regular pair of glasses because A, he doesn't have ears to hook earpieces onto, and secondly, like his head's so wide, so I had to draw the glasses huge, and then that suggested, oh, well, if they're that big, they would magnify his eyes to like anime size eyes. So it all was just sort of this organic kind of process of once I started sketching ideas, it was like, oh, that works. Like that, the image of him with the big glasses, I was like, oh, that actually looks really funny. Let's go with that. And so then, yeah, it was just starting to kind of, my brain was just kind of throwing ideas at me of like, oh, and he could do this and he could do that, and what if he did this? What's a sort of funny situation that someone with a huge head could get into? And his superpower is basically destroying things. So kind of like the irony of a guy who's trying to help, but all he can do to help is destroy something. And so if that's not really applicable in the situation, it's like, well, too bad. Sorry, I was trying to foil your jewelry shop robbery, but I actually destroyed your shop in the course of trying to stop the robbers. So it's that kind of, that's the premise basically. And then the story in issue 1 is another idea that came from a conversation with my sons when they were little, which was, what if there was a giant gingerbread man? And so that sort of suggested like, okay, well then what if it was like an evil Willy Wonka type character and he used the comic writer Grant Morrison back in the 90s when they were doing Batman, what was it? Legends of the Dark Knight. They did a storyline called Gothic, and at the time they were talking about they put this element called occult architecture into the story, and I just was like, occult architecture, what's that? And so when I was doing this story, I thought, well, what if there was occult confectionery, and Sugar Daddy, the villain, had studied the art of occult confectionery, so it's sort of magical candy making. And so yeah, he creates this giant gingerbread man, and he uses one of those conversation hearts, because I researched the Jewish folklore of golems, and usually they're made out of clay, and they put a word of power on the golem, and that binds the golem to the will of the person creating the golem. And so I thought in this case, the word of power could be written on one of those conversation heart candies, but it's a giant one, and it's where his heart would be. So yeah, that explains the characters and the premise of this story.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, obviously, when I was reading it, I fell in love instantly with your character design. So it's
Thanks.
so amazing to know that you've pulled inspiration and you've included your kids into that process. We will talk a little bit about the process of how you came to make this comic a little later in the show.
Okay.
But also, I fell in love with some of your the different covers that other artists created, and I just fell in love with all the colors in it. But the fact that obviously the comic is black and white, it's done so well, and it's just very enthralling. And again, it's like you said, tongue in cheek, and I think it's something that you see so much of, like the superheroes, and it's very serious and high stakes and things like that. And like Steamroller Man, I think really brings in a lot of joy into those kinds of stories. So yeah, I had a ball reading it.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. So I guess having said all that, can we maybe wind it back a little bit? Can you maybe describe, obviously we've got pictures to the side here, a little bit about your own art style and perhaps a little bit of your journey alongside that?
Yeah. Well, I started drawing as a kid, as I think most of us who draw comics, as adults started as kids, and I was, people ask me like what my influences are, and I don't necessarily try consciously to draw like any particular artist. I'm definitely trying to achieve a similar look to the style of like 1970s Marvel comics, let's say. But the black and white style started off as a purely pragmatic, practical choice, because I knew that I wanted to eventually print this. And I knew that initially I was thinking of doing this as like just a little photocopied zine type mini comic. But it just kind of grew, like the story just became bigger and bigger. And then I was like, I think I want to do this as an actual like US format, like proper comic type thing. But then I knew that like black and white comics are cheaper than color comics to print. And then I was thinking like, well, maybe I'll do it black and white, because I started publishing this on the web. And all my comics are available to read for free online at steamrollerman.com. If you want a print version, the Kickstarter's on right now at kickstarter.steamrollerman.com. And thank you to Sis for creating the vanity URL for that, setting that up for me, because I don't know anything about making websites or anything like that. But yeah, so then like I had the thought of like, oh, well, maybe I'll put it up online in black and white and then color it for the print version. But then I had people like complimenting the black and white artwork.
Yeah.
And I had actually said to a few of them like, oh, well, I'm going to color it when I print it. And they were like, no. Keep it black and white. Like the black and white is what makes it distinctive, because you don't see many superhero comics that look like this in black and white and the person I was talking to really liked like the screen tones that I was using,
yes.
Which I really have fun doing, getting that look and stuff. And so that was enough to kind of convince me, oh, okay, so yeah, I'll just keep it black and white, and that'll be the look of the comic. That's the style. So yeah, again, I'm not a person who really tries to adopt a certain style. I think because of my work in animation, and in animation, when you work in animation, you're usually drawing in someone else's style, and that's part of the job. Yeah. So for this, it was just really like a freeing kind of process of, I'm just going to draw how I want to draw, and it's just going to come out how it comes out. And admittedly, like if you look on the website, you go back to the earliest stuff that I did, you will see like, oh, the early pages are definitely more primitive than the latest pages. So my art has gotten more complex and more detailed as I've been working on it over the last, 6 years or so.
Right.
But it's all the only sort of conscious effort that I put into changing the style is all about I'm just trying to make it look as good as I can possibly look, as good as it can possibly look,
Yeah.
So and yeah, I'm not I as far as like influences, it's more like I'll see like I'll look at things like I really love the clean inking style of people like Brian Bolland and Charles Burns and Daniel Clowes and Dave Stevens, the guy who created Rocketeer. And then I love all the EC artists, like from the 50s, like those EC horror comic artists. I love all that stuff. Actually trying to emulate that a little bit in the Sugar Daddy sequence at the beginning of this issue. So it's more like each individual page, it's just what I happen to be looking at when I'm working on the page. And it's like I was looking at the Rocketeer, for instance, when I was drawing one of my most recent pages for issue 3. And I noticed he used like these circular inset panels. And I was like, that's cool. Like I got to figure out a way to use a circular inset panel somehow.
Yeah.
And so then I'm just like, okay, how can I fit a circular panel somewhere in this layout? And so it's just stuff like that I just inject stuff of whatever I'm looking at. It's not like, oh yeah, I love John Byrne and I've been copying his artwork from when I was a kid. I didn't really learn to draw that way when I was a kid. Like I wasn't one of those kids who traced the artwork of my favorite artist to try and learn how they drew, or copied my favorite artist. I just always tried to just draw something that looked human or whatever, like good.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, does that answer your question?
Absolutely. And I like just to, go on from that. I think the fact that it must have been so liberating for you to do your own project and put your own passion into it and make it look just like what you want it to look like. I can sympathize, or maybe not sympathize is the right word, but I understand where you come from. When you work in the animation studio, you're working in somebody else's style. So as for me, I really enjoy being able to make something for myself and wanting to. So I completely understand where you're coming from that. And like I said, your character designs just charmed me from the beginning. And I think, like you said, with like the large eyes, like Steamroller Man, he just exudes like, I don't know. When I first saw him, my first response to him was like, wow, what a friendly guy. Because of his eyes, I just love that character design so much. And again, like the originality as well, like being able to bring your kids into that process of creating these characters, like, just wonderful. And something that you don't always hear about as well. So it kind of leads me to my next question. I really enjoy asking this question in particular because I like to know, especially someone with such extensive experience in the industry. What would you say are your strengths when creating?
Oh boy, wow, that's a tough question for someone with chronically low self-esteem like me to answer. What are my strengths when creating? Oh,
what do you like to draw upon? Yeah. I like to be as positive as possible about the creating process.
I think one of my strengths is I'm always like doing wordplay, and like there's a lot of puns in Steamroller
Yes.
Man. That's one of my, like, I love puns and I love wordplay, and I'm always kind of like, I've got a whole Google Doc of just funny sounding character names that and that just comes from, like, I just hear things in conversation and then I'm like, oh, like Susan Shocks instead of shoes and socks, Susan Shocks. That's a cool name. Stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's
And might I add, like, Sugar Daddy? Amazing. I love that so much. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, originally I was thinking, oh, Candyman, but then I thought, I'm sure somebody's done Candyman, and then so I was like, oh, Sugar Daddy, that'll work. And then when I was preparing it for print, I thought, oh, his real name could be Manny Cavities. So it's many cavities.
Yeah.
Like the Sugar Daddy. So yeah, it's just those kind of, I like funny sounding names.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so I think that is definitely one of my strengths. And I think also, having worked on The Simpsons for so long, that's really given me an awareness of how to visually stage a joke for maximum comedic impact. And I've learned so much on The Simpsons over the course of my time on the show. It taught me my drawing skills, like, just elevated, just because when I first started on The Simpsons, like, as a layout artist, you get a section of the show, like you get 10 scenes, and it's just like whatever happens in those 10 scenes and whatever's in those 10 scenes, you got to draw it. So no matter if it's like a crowd scene or just a close-up of Bart or a horse race or whatever, like in my first week on The Simpsons, in my section I had a section where Homer was fighting the leader of a bikie gang, and they were doing a sword fight with their motorcycles. So they had to pick up the motorcycles and go bash, bash, bash. And I'd never drawn a motorcycle in my life. And it was my first week on the job. And so I was like, I got to figure out how to draw a motorcycle real fast. And so it sort of throws you in the deep end, and it's sort of, I learned so much about perspective and composition and stuff just through trial and error and doing a bad job and then being corrected by the more experienced artists on the show and the directors on the show. And and so I bring that into the comic. I kind of think that I couldn't have drawn the comic before I started actually drawing it, because I don't think my artistic skills would have been quite up to the task until I drew it at the time I did. So I kind of have a philosophical viewpoint that, like, Steamroller Man happened when it was meant to happen, in terms of my artistic development. So I don't know. Is that a good enough answer for your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And that would have been.
Oh, can I interrupt? Can I just for a second? I just want to say that motorcycle scene.
Yeah.
I know that scene. I love that scene. So thank you.
Nice. You're welcome. Thank you. That's
It
cool.
must be such a cool feeling. Unfortunately, I didn't watch a lot of The Simpsons growing up. Sadly,
It's okay.
Definitely something that I definitely want to get back into, because all my friends are always raving about it. So all my friends watching, they're going to be like, "Oh, Shaden, God, you still haven't gotten onto it." That must be such a cool experience, Shane, for you to be like, "I've seen that scene," and now to be able to talk to someone who made that scene. I think
Yes, that's very cool.
That must be a cool feeling.
Well, thank you. Thanks. That's awesome.
I'll have to look out for the motorbike scene, that's for sure, in future. But that must be so, like, you must have such a plethora of skills in your tool belt. And it's so interesting for you to like reflect on that whole process to get to where you are now with Steamroller Man. On the back end of that question, I think a lot of artists can agree with me here is that, you know, you're always constantly improving yourself. Like there's always something more to learn.
Absolutely.
Especially with technology and everything going on these days. Are there any skills that you are currently trying to improve or something that you've learned recently?
Oh, yeah. There's always, I mean, as you alluded to, the process of working on Steamroller Man every day, because, you know, I do try and not while I've been preparing the Kickstarter, because that's like so much work. I haven't had time to actually sit and draw the comic for so long while I've been getting the Kickstarter ready. But on a normal day, I work on the comic every day before work, before I actually start my regular job. And just that daily practice of drawing every day, and especially like a superhero thing where it's so much about like muscles and anatomy and pose, like weird poses. It really has stretched my drawing abilities to their limits, but it's also forced me to, you know, learn how to draw the serratus muscles. You know, they're those scalloped muscles under the arm sort of thing. And so there's always something where I'm like, oh God, I can't draw knees. That's one of the most recent ones, was like, I really have to figure out how a knee actually works, because I got to draw this pose where his knee is like front and center in the frame. And what I've just drawn doesn't look right. So I have a whole bunch of anatomy books like right to my right. And so, yeah, it's good because it sort of forces you to learn what you don't know, and then you take definite steps to improve that. Drapery and folds in clothing is definitely something that I was not comfortable drawing when I first started this comic. And, you know, I've got Steamroller Man wearing regular clothes, and then I've got Sugar Daddy wearing this kind of I don't know, 17th century dandies outfit, which was kind of like, after drawing that for a while, I'm like, why on earth did I make him, like, why did I put him in this costume? I'm sick of drawing this bloody costume. But, you know, again, it forces you to get better at drawing stuff you don't like drawing. And that's also something that animation helped with, was like, before I started working on The Simpsons, I never really drew backgrounds. Working on The Simpsons really made me realize how important a background is, even in comics. And so you'll see in a lot of my panels, I do put backgrounds in, because the background lines can actually be used as compositional elements to lead your eye to lead the viewer's eye to what you want them to look at, with the lines of perspective and stuff. You know, so like in that cover that's on screen now, those banisters and stairs, they're pointing down towards the word balloon that's coming out of Steamroller Man's head. So it's all sort of focusing at Steamroller Man in the lower left corner. So it's all, you know, all that compositional stuff I really get into that aspect of comic making, is like composing the panels, I'm really particular about where I put the word balloons, because word balloons are so important, and letterers, I feel, are like the unsung magicians of the comic industry, because if the lettering is wrong, or, you know, if it's placed wrong, you notice it immediately. If it's right, you don't notice it, which is kind of like the irony of letterers doing a good job. Nobody notices that they've done a great job.
Exactly.
So that's one thing I'm really particular about, is the lettering as well, which is a very nitpicky, minor thing to get into, but that's me. So
No, but it's such an important thing as well. I'm currently a second year graphic design student.
oh, great.
So even I understand where you're coming from, even though it's from an animation background. I think this is where like the industries kind of like converge. Looking at that cover right there next to us, even like the typography of like Sinister, Sweetness, Sugar Daddy,
Yeah.
like even points towards
Right.
Steamroller Man, and like just
Yeah.
having all these different elements. It's not just like the composition, like you said with the banisters. It's always like about leading lines and stuff like that.
Exactly.
Graphic design elements come into play. There's so much, like I feel like you said, letterers, like if you notice it, then it might not always fit or it might not always work. But when you don't notice it, you know it's done well. And it's it's so ironic.
Yeah.
So it's so interesting to hear other people's perspectives. And it's like such as yourself noticing those small details that just make it just amazing.
Yeah.
You did say also that so this has been 6 years in the making. Is that correct? Did you say?
Yeah, I mean, not this issue. I've been doing Steamroller Man for 6 years. These I first started Steamroller Man in 2017, and I started putting it online in 2018.
Right.
And now it's 24. I've gotten, I think I've done about 100 pages. This is the first 40 pages of the story. I've also done issue 2. That's ready to go. And I'm halfway through drawing issue 3.
Yes.
So I've been doing it since 2018, but this issue, these are all from 2018 and 2019. And then I redrew, I think maybe like the first 5 or 6 pages of this issue. I went back and like completely revamped for the print version in preparation to do the Kickstarter campaign. And I did that in 21 or 22. So, yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So it's been, it sounds like such an interesting process. What was your favorite stage in that process for you?
My favorite stage is always the inking. I really love black and white, like I really love black and white art. I don't feel as comfortable working in color. I think it's just because I haven't done it as much as I've done black and white. So I'm very comfortable doing black and white artwork, and I just love inking stuff and making it look cool. I love putting those screen tones down, and because I work in Clip Studio Paint, like I do the whole comic in Clip Studio, and they have, that software has awesome tools for getting really nice screen tone effects like what you're seeing on these pages. And so I'm always trying to, come up with new little tricks and stuff that I can do in Clip Studio to get something looking really cool. Yeah, so that's my favorite part of the process is the inking.
It definitely shows. And for someone who very much appreciates screen tones, I think you've done them very, very well.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. It's phenomenal. Like the contrast within the black and white pages, it's just a joy to read.
Thank you.
I guess on the back end of that, again, what do you find most challenging in your process?
I think the biggest challenge is it's the actual drawing of the stuff that I'm not comfortable drawing. The things that I've never drawn before, let's say. The writing is also, I wouldn't say it's challenging because I still enjoy it, but I am constantly rewording, like I'm revising all the dialogue all the way through the process. Like I start off and because I don't work from a full script at all. I just work from an outline, and I know where the story has to go. I just don't know how many pages it's going to take to get there. So I'll rough out, three or four pages, thumbnail layouts at a time to just say, okay, so this is the next story point. Let's see how many pages that's going to take to tell that story point. So I'll do my little thumbnails, and then as I'm doing the thumbnails, I'll think like, oh, okay, I could put a joke in here. And so the story is very, like, it grows very organically because of that. But I think that's better for the comedy, because the comedy is, at least the way that I come up with jokes, it's in response to stimuli, right? Like if somebody says something, then I'm like, oh, and I come up with a comeback, some kind of funny line or whatever. So it's almost like I'm doing that with myself, where I come up with the plot first of like, here's the events, and now let's take another look and see how can I add jokes to that. And then so that's sort of a challenge, is like, what can I, I'm like, how can I make this bit funny? What do I like? What's funny about this part? And but it also results in like a lot of kind of twists and turns in the story. Like in issue 2, I introduced 2 characters who were kind of like my Batman and Robin sort of analog characters, and they're called Night Night and Sleep Tyke, and they're sleep themed superheroes. They basically just go out in their jammies and fight crime at night. And they're a father and son. And I had the idea for them just in my kind of idea file. But as I did issue 1, I realized, like, man, comics take a long time to do. I'm never going to get to all these other ideas I have. I don't even know how long it's going to take to get through this one sugar daddy story. And so that's when I was like, I think I've got to start pulling in other ideas for characters that I have, and just sort of put them into this world and see how they fit. And so bringing Night Night and Sleep Tyke in, it actually was great, and it sort of made the story take a completely different way to getting to the end point than what I initially thought it was going to be before they were going to be in the story. So yeah, the writing of the story is definitely a challenge, but it's also a fun challenge because I don't know where it's going to go. I just sort of know, well, I got to get to this, it's sort of like you see the house on the hill that you got to get to, and it's like, well, we can go around to the left, or we can go around to the right.
Absolutely.
But we know we got to get there by the end of the day, sort of thing, So
and I think that feeds onto the whole liberating feeling it must feel like, I would assume, that you don't have like a clear-cut path of how to get there. There's all these like open avenues on the journey to get there. That must be so fun to play with and be able to change on your own accord. So that's really interesting to hear that process of it, because obviously, a lot of artists work with a script, and then to hear from yourself that it's a little bit more loose and a little bit more organic. That's really cool to hear. Yeah, absolutely. So I know that when this releases, you'll be in your second week, or second to last week.
I think it's second to last week. The campaign ends on June 6th. So
amazing. How exciting. I was wondering, obviously that's in the future. Can you give us a little bit of an idea of how that process to launch the Kickstarter has been for you in the lead up?
Sure. It's been a journey. I first started thinking about doing a Kickstarter. It would have been like 3 or 4 years ago. And I did some initial research, and it just seemed like so much work. I was just like, you know what? Maybe I won't. I'll just do like print on demand kind of a thing, and I'll just sell it through an Etsy storefront or something. And I came to know John Boy Myers, the the comic book artist. Like, he's an American comic book artist, and he's very kind of successful and high profile in the comic book industry over here. Just happened to sort of randomly meet him at a comic convention one year, and I told him about, like, oh, I said, like, can I get your advice on, just as a comic professional? Like, I've been doing my own comic just in my spare time as a thing for fun, but I do want to publish it eventually. This was when I had about 10 pages done. And I said, I don't know, like, whether I should, like, print it or do like a photocopied mini comic or put it on the web. A lot of people are telling me just do a web comic, but I don't know about anything about coding or websites or anything like that. So I wouldn't know where to start with that. And he actually said, well, why don't you just put it on Facebook? Like, set up a page for your comic on Facebook and then just upload the images like you would put your photos on your Facebook page. And I was like, oh, that's actually that's a great idea. Because I know how to use Facebook. That's great. And he said, yeah, so, once you get that set up, just send me a message on Facebook and I'll share your page with my followers. And I was like, oh, really? You do that? And he was like, yeah, I'm all about, like, promoting independent comics, and your idea sounds really good. And, I just want to get new ideas and new creators into the industry. And I was like, oh, okay. And I just, I kind of thought, oh, he's just saying that to be nice. But I did what he said, and I sent him a message and said, hey, remember me? I'm the guy with the Steamroller Man comic. And so here it is. Here's my page that I set up. And true to his word, he shared it with his followers. And I think that's how I got my first, like, maybe 50 or so followers on the Facebook page at that time. And so that was like the beginning of the journey. And he was the one who first told me, you got to do a Kickstarter. When he was like, when are you going to print this comic, man? Because I would go back every year. I would see him at a comic convention. I'd just chat and thank you. I'd say, like, thank you so much for that initial push you gave me, like, because wouldn't have happened without your encouragement. And he was like, yeah, well, when are you going to print it? And I said, yeah, well, I'm still kind of working out options and what my, how I should do it. And he was like, you should do a Kickstarter. And I said, well, really? Because I've heard that's a lot of work. And I was thinking of just doing like an online kind of store, like print on demand thing. And he was like, no, do not do print on demand. You have to do a Kickstarter. And I was like, why? and he said, you're going to discover, like, so many more people will discover your work just by being on Kickstarter than would if you just set up your own little online store and you're only trying to publicize it through your Facebook thing. He was basically saying, like, Kickstarter has a huge footprint and a lot of traffic going through Kickstarter browsing the new comic ideas. And so I was like, oh, okay, all right, I'll look into it. And then, so I did look into it, and I was still, like, really like, oh, I don't know whether I want to do this. And it took another couple of years of seeing him at comic conventions, just catching up with him, and him sort of saying, like, how's that Kickstarter coming? What's going on? I should have seen it by now. So he was really encouraging, and I was sort of dragging my feet. And then he finally said last year, he was like, look, what if I do a cover for you? And then I was like, oh, yeah, okay, wow. You sure? And he was like, yeah, I want you to get this thing on Kickstarter. And so I was like, all right, okay, I have no choice. I will do it. I will get it on Kickstarter. And so that was when I really got serious about it. And there's a guy online called Tyler James who does this Kickstarter, like how to do comics Kickstarter course called Comics Launch. And I had been following his podcast for a couple of years, and he offers like a paid course as well. But I really resisted doing the paid course for a long time too, because I was like, I can do it myself. I'll just listen to the podcast. I'm not going to pay for it. But then I kind of hit a wall in my knowledge, and I was like, there's so much to do to prepare a Kickstarter campaign. I've reached a point where I'm just like, I don't know how to do the rest of this. I don't know what I'm supposed to do next. I don't know what order I'm supposed to do anything in. And so then I was like, you know what? I'm just going to bite the bullet. I'm going to pay for this course and just see how it goes. And honestly, if it wasn't for doing that course, I wouldn't have even launched the Kickstarter, because his course was exactly what I needed at that point in time, in the sense that he gives you a literal checklist of if you want to do a Kickstarter, first you got to do this, second this, third this, fourth this, step by step of like, here's everything you have to do from the moment you start thinking, I may want to do a Kickstarter, to the moment you press launch on the campaign page, even beyond that, to fulfilling the campaign and all that. Like, he spells it out. He's very experienced. He's run tons of successful Kickstarter campaigns of his own. And so I think that if anyone out there is thinking about doing a Kickstarter but doesn't really know how to go about doing it, it's totally worth investing in this comics launch course. And it is an investment.
It is.
And I think you can actually, count it as a tax deduction, because your Kickstarter proceeds will be counted as income. So you can deduct the course as expenses against that income. But yeah, so that's a free ad for Tyler's comics launch course. But like, I'm totally sincere. Like, I think it is such a valuable thing for me to have done. And the Kickstarter, it launched earlier this week. We're taping this second week of May, and it launched on May 7th. My Kickstarter funded in 40 minutes, and it's on day 5 now, and it's currently like 500 and something % funded, which is that's beyond my wildest dreams of how well I thought it was going to do. I was like, if I can get $750 in 30 days, that's going to be awesome. So to get 750 in 40 minutes just blew me away.
Wow,
so yeah.
Absolutely. Congratulations.
Thanks.
Yeah, that sounds like, it's so interesting to hear people's like journey to do Kickstarters, because everybody has such a different story, I find.
Yeah.
And yeah, very admirable to hear your goals along the way, and to now be there. Yeah, honestly, I wish you all the best. Obviously, it is early days. And when this does go to launch, you'll be in your second to last week of the campaign. So
right.
Yeah, to all the future viewers, make sure you go and check it out, because it's well worth it. I guess again, go and check it out when you can. I guess kind of moving pace a little bit, now that this has kind of come to fruition for you, are there any other projects on the horizon?
Just more Steamroller Man.
Like, how many volumes perhaps?
Yeah, so initially when I first came up with the idea for this story, before because it's the first thing that I'd done, and this is the first comic that I've really ever made. I was always, I was one of those guys who always wanted to do a comic. Even from when I was 13 years old, I wanted to work in comics. And it's not until now that I've actually gone like, you know what, like it's put up or shut up time. Like if I'm going to do it, let's just knuckle down and just do it and stop, procrastinating. And so also because I didn't work from a script, I had no idea how many pages it would take to tell the story that I had in my mind. So as I said, I knew where the story would start, I know where it's going to end, and I know the various story beats. But initially I was like, yeah, I can do that in 22 pages. Yeah, it's easy. But then because I was working without a script and kind of getting there in an improvisational way, it just grew. Like the number of pages that I needed to get to like the certain points in the story, I was like, oh geez, like that took me like 8 pages. I thought I was going to be able to do that in 1 page. Okay, so I got to recalculate. And then, so, then I sort of thought, okay, so then I'll do 4 issues and there'll be 22 pages each. Because 22 pages is the standard like American length of an issue. And even that, even the first issue of that, so when I decided it was going to be 4 issues, I broke the story up into, like, if it's a 3-act structure, act 1 is issue 1, act 2 is issues 2 and 3, and act 3, the final climactic part of the story, that's issue 4. So I thought, okay, each one of those is going to be 22 pages. And so then as I'm doing issue 1, still, like, issue 1 has a 12-page musical number in it at the beginning. And that was not planned at all. That was, again, just a joke idea that I had, like, about, like, well, how can I introduce the main character? Oh, it'd be funny if he was like singing, like walking down the street singing. And then it became this big musical number. And then it was, I was just coming up with jokes. And it was like, oh, it'd be funny if, this, and coming up with like rhyming couplets for the song. And then I would do like a visual gag to go with each couplet. And then that ended up just expanding and expanding. And it was at that point when I was doing the musical number that people started asking me, like, are you going to print it? This would be great in print. When are you going to print it? And I was like, yeah, no, I want to print it. I'll definitely look into that. And when I looked into it, I realized, oh, if I want to get a quote on how much it's going to cost to print this, I need to know how many pages this issue is going to be. And I was like, okay, so I'm already 12 pages in, so that's halfway. And I haven't even really established like what the story's about yet, because I'm just doing a musical number. And so that's why the first issue ended up being 40 pages, because I was like, okay, it's not going to be 22 pages. I better wrap up this musical number and actually get into the meat of the story. So then by the time I got to the end of the first issue, which is a cliffhanger, it was 38 pages. And then for the Kickstarter, because it's all online, I added 2 pages to the print version so that, there's a bit of extra stuff. If you buy even if you've read it online already, there's extra stuff in the print version that you haven't seen that's not online. So, I've got to, so my future plans are finish issue 3, finish issue 4, because I still have the 3-act structure thing. So end of issue 3 is, issue 3 reveals Sugar Daddy's origin story. You work out why he is the way he is and what his ultimate plan is. Sorry, I have friggin' Kickstarter on the brain. I have made so many like slip up kind of speech things where I'll just start saying Kickstarter. It's like, sorry, didn't mean to say Kickstarter. It's crazy. I don't even know what I was going to say.
Just another reminder for everyone to go see the Kickstarter, really. But
exactly. Kickstarter.steamrollerman.com. Anyway, so end of issue 3, Sugar Daddy's ultimate plan is revealed, and it's sort of like when he kind of pushes activate on the plan coming, like, oh no, the doomsday button has been pushed kind of thing. And then issue 4 is going to be the big climactic battle where, you know, people live, people die. Will Steamroller Man succeed? Who knows? You know. And so yeah, issue 4 is going to be the end of this story. After that, like, I have a ton of, as I said, I've got a ton of other ideas for more Steamroller Man stories that will introduce other characters and sort of build out his world. But for future stories, I am definitely going to at least plot them very carefully so that every issue beyond these is a one-shot, and it's just a done-in-one story that you can just read and enjoy. If you haven't read any other Steamroller Man stories, you can just pick these ones up, and it's just a good sort of self-contained story. So beyond, and that was initially the plan for this story as well. It just was not very well. It wasn't a well-planned plan, if we can put it that way.
But it came out beautifully nonetheless. So
yeah. I mean, it's working out. It just wasn't. It's just taking a bit longer than I expected it would. So yeah.
That's so fascinating to hear. That whole process from Kickstarter and to seeing what it will come to down the line. I guess to kind of cap the end of our interview, I love also asking this question, especially for our viewers. What piece of advice would you give to someone who's starting their journey?
Yeah, I would say, look, from the point of view of someone who procrastinated for literally 30 years, who has I've wanted to do my own comic since I was a kid. And since I moved over here, I've gone to comic conventions every year, and I always come away thinking, yeah, I want to do my own comic one day. Like every year I would say, yeah, I want to do a comic one day. I want to get my own booth at Comic-Con, but I never took that step to, like, okay, well, actually, like, the first step is start drawing your comic, dude. So my advice would be, don't wait for your skills to be at a sort of hypothetical perfect level before you start just making your comic, because that's what I was doing. Like, I would draw something and I'd be like, yeah, but this looks like crap. I can't do this. Or I would come up with ideas that were so complex that once I started writing them, I was like, I'd get discouraged because I was like, this is going to take so long to do. Like, I can't do this. Rather than just like starting without a net, basically, like just jumping in the deep end. And it was only because Steamroller Man only happened because I kind of viewed it as a throwaway idea, because everybody I know, like, I've talked to enough artists and people interested in comics that I know everybody has the idea for their grand epic, you know, Lord of the Rings style story in their head. And I do too. And I thought, and I heard the advice, and I think it was from Xander Cannon, who is an artist who did a excellent comic called Kaiju Max, which, if you haven't read, You should seek it out. It's fantastic. It's a prison drama in a supermax prison for giant monsters, and it's fantastic. It's fantastic. It's one of the
Sounds
best
cool.
comics I've ever read. One of my favorite comics ever. I saw he wrote an article or something about, or it was in the back of one of his comics where he was giving advice to somebody who wrote in about this exact topic. And he basically said, like, just start doing it. Don't do a lot of, like, don't worry about backstory. Don't spend time doing all these character designs, because all that's delaying you from actually getting pages produced on your comic. And the most encouraging thing that you will experience when you're doing a comic is finishing a page and finishing another page. So he was like, design your main character and then start drawing your comic, and design every other character. Just design them on the page as you need to design them. And I was like, yeah, that sounds good. That's what I'm going to do. And he also had the idea of start with something small and like a throwaway idea that it's not going to matter if it doesn't turn out good, because he said it's almost guaranteed that your first comic is not going to be good. It's going to look like crap. You aren't going to be happy with the way it looks. Just accept the reality that that's what's going to happen, and that's going to be more freeing for you creatively. And so that's what I did with Steamroller Man when I first started it. This issue is not the first Steamroller Man story that I drew. If you go on steamrollerman.com, you will see the first Steamroller Man story that I drew is much more primitively drawn than this. But I had to go through that to get to this. And yeah, my advice is just dive in and start making your comic. You're going to learn so much about making comics through the act of making comics. As I was saying earlier in our conversation, every time I would hit a hurdle with, I can't draw knees, or I don't know how to draw, the way that a suit jacket folds when somebody's wearing it, I have to learn that now. And that's the process you go through. And also just recognize that every artist is on like a spectrum of artists with every other artist in the world. And I don't mean like the autism spectrum. I don't mean like on the spectrum in terms of the autism spectrum. I just mean like a wide variety of like the color spectrum, right? So there's always going to be somebody who can draw better than you, and you're going to look at going, oh my God, I don't even know how they do what they do. I could never get to that level. And there's always going to be somebody who's not as skilled as you are, who's looking at you, thinking that about you. Yeah. So that is also something that is freeing about, I can't draw. Because I don't see drawing as some God-given thing that happens at birth. No one comes out of the womb holding a pencil, able to draw the Mona Lisa. We all do those scribbly drawings when we're little, and it's a matter of, well, some people were encouraged as kids, like, oh, that's lovely, darling, I'll do it again. Yeah, little Jackie's a good artist, isn't he? And then other people weren't encouraged, and so they just stop. So it's all a matter of like putting in that groundwork and just putting in the time of, it's practice. It really is just a skill that gets better with practice, and absolutely, it won't get better if you don't practice. So absolutely. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I'm talking too much.
No. It's wonderful to hear. I think also, like I said earlier on, I'm a firm believer in like artists. you're always learning. Like there's always something to improve. You're never just
Yeah.
going to get to that endpoint. That endpoint, I don't think really exists. I think there's
Definitely.
always something that you can learn, and from other people as well.
Yeah.
And it was really, really insightful to hear kind of your process and what you've learned from other people in this whole process of launching Steamroller Man. But yeah, I also liked the fact that you said or encouraged to, like, you know, you obviously have a main character ready, fleshed out, and go for it. But then you also said like a bit of your secondary characters, design them on the page. And I think that is actually a really wonderful piece of advice, because even as graphic designers, we are encouraged to almost work backwards. If you are designing a character on the page, like if you've designed that character in like a character turnaround, very like static, sometimes the shapes that you use, the clothes they wear or whatever, it doesn't always translate very well onto the page. So by doing so, by putting it on the page first and seeing how it works, you can really knead out those issues quite fast. And so I think that is a really wonderful piece of advice. Different kind of approach to it as well. It's not really your classic approach in character design. Obviously, having a main character ready to roll and you know exactly what they're going to look like is very important.
Right.
But I've never really heard people vouch for that kind of approach. So yeah, it's really wonderful to hear. But again, I mean, that really concludes all of my questions for you, Matt.
I was having so much fun answering them.
I'm really glad. Yeah, I try and make obviously the show about one particular project for that person to promote, but I also want to try and get a little bit of knowledge out of people and about their process, a little bit of their story and how they got to be where they are today. So that's the whole premise of the show. But just to reiterate, before we wrap things up, can you let us know again where to find Steamroller Man?
Yeah, so the Kickstarter, which is on now, is at kickstarter.steamrollerman.com, which is up on the screen right now. And if you want to just read the comic, everything I've done so far is up online for free at steamrollerman.com. It's broken down into issues because my intention was always to print it. I have 2 complete issues, sort of like a mini comic, which is the first story I ever did. It's 12 pages long. And I'm halfway through, or, you know, maybe a third of the way through issue 3. I'm about 14 pages into issue 3. So not quite halfway. But yeah, if you want to just read it for free, I'd love, you know, just more people to become aware of Steamroller Man. And but yeah, like I really do want to get it. Anyone who wants a print copy, I'm all about print. You know, it's sort of ironic that I publish it as a web comic, but I don't really enjoy, like, I don't have the patience to read comics on the web past about like 10 pages. But with a physical comic book, like, I can read those all afternoon, you know. So
Same.
yeah, so I think it's just a matter of like whatever you're into. I want to get Steamroller Man out to as many people as I can through as many venues as I can. So Steamroller Man's also on like Global Comics and Tapas and Comic Fury. You can find it there. But then, yeah, my website is steamrollerman.com. So, yeah.
Amazing. And I mean, just to thank you for all your time coming on the show.
Thank you.
Letting us know about your amazing comic creation, I should say.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. So make sure to all our future viewers to go and check it out and support in any way you can. I guess, yeah, again, thank you so much for being on the show. Shane, was there anything else to bookend our show today?
Yes, I made a mistake at the beginning. It is not Drink and Draw this week. It is Comics Recent Reads this week. It's Drink and Draw, the real week that we're in.
Yes.
Not the week that we'll be in broadcasting. So I just thought I'd add that there. And also, I have paused it here on purpose, this picture, because I absolutely love those giant glasses. You have no idea. I hadn't read any of the comic at that point, and I saw those and went, I have to read this.
Yay!
I love that, especially when you see that they're tiny little normalized.
Right. Yep.
Absolutely.
I'm glad.
Well,
I'm glad that landed with you, Shane.
It did, big time.
Well, again, thank you so much for coming onto the show, Matt. We wish
Thank
you
you
all
for
the best
both for
with-
having me on the show.
Absolutely.
Really
It's an honor,
appreciate it.
an absolute honor. I wish you all the best. We wish you all the best with the Kickstarter, and I'm sure there'll be many people keeping an eye out for what is to come for your series.
1,000%.
Thank you both. So
Absolutely.
awesome. I had so much fun talking to you, Shaden.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you to all our future viewers for watching. We will see you guys in 2 weeks' time. But otherwise, take care.
Take care. Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Check out comex.cx for all things comics and find out what comics is all about.